Hey everyone, time for another chocolate this Thursday. This week we're going to do a chocolate bar or a chocolate company from New Zealand, Hogarth Chocolate. So Hogarth was started very recently in 2014. They launched in New Zealand nationally in 2015. They are out of Nelson, New Zealand, which is on the South Island. So you've got two islands in New Zealand. You've got the North Island and the South Island. Auckland and Wellington are on the North Island, and then just across on the tip of the South Island is Nelson. So they launched in 2015, and they've been really successful, and they've gotten some awards since they've launched in 2017 and 2018. But I want to give you a little bit of background so that some of the things on the bars make sense. So it was started by Carl and Marina Hogarth. Carl is from New Zealand. He started off after school when he was 15 or 16. He became a deck boy and a fisherman, and he would go out to sea. By 26 years old, he was a skipper of his own trawler, and he used to go out for long trips to sea. But after 12 years, he decided to go back to school. He went to university and earned a business degree in 2007. And after that, after university, he did something called an OE, which is very common for people to do in Australia and New Zealand. It's called overseas experience. And he went to Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, South America, Central America, Mexico. He did a really good OE. And while he was on this overseas experience, two life-changing things happened to him. The first one was that he met his wife in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Marina. That was the first. The second thing that was a life-changing event was that he tasted real cacao in Guatemala. And he said that it was like nothing that he had ever tasted in a grocery store, that it was more like fudge and cocoa, and so good. It would really just change his whole thinking about chocolate. So Marina and Carl got married. They lived in Argentina for a year in Buenos Aires, and then they decided to return back to New Zealand for work. Carl became a second officer he was working on ships for oil companies in the oil industry, and again that took him away for long sea voyages. He was away for long periods of time. But because he had had that experience with chocolate in Guatemala, he just in the back of his head was thinking about chocolate, and I can make my own chocolate, and this is how chocolate is made, and the wheels started turning. And so he decided to kind of start it as a hobby in his shed. He did some research, found chocolate alchemy, as many chocolate makers do. It's a fantastic source of information. John Nancy has just done so much for the chocolate industry, the craft chocolate industry. So he found chocolate alchemy. He got some machines from Singapore and started tinkering in his shed. And his friends and neighbors, this is a familiar story, friends and neighbors said, "Oh, this is the best chocolate we've ever tasted." So they thought they might sell it at their local farmers market. They applied to do that, but the local council didn't like it because they weren't set up to regulation. So at this point, with the long voyages overseas, they had just had a baby girl together. They decided that after 20 years of seafaring life, Carl would give it up, and they would jump in together into having a chocolate factory and setting up a real chocolate factory. So they went into business. Carl was doing the chocolate making. Marina, she has experience in public relations. She did public relations for Converse in Argentina. So they've got a well-rounded knowledge set there. And they began making their chocolate and selling it at the local markets. And then in 2015, they went national, and their international reach is growing all the time. So the bar that I have, that I am going to open today, is the Porcelana Bar from them. Normally I think their packages are white. This is the only bar that I was able to get from Hogarth. It's a little bit tricky sometimes to get it in the United States, but it's getting easier. So let's flip the camera around and check out this bar. Okay, so we've got this bar from Hogarth Chocolate makers out of New Zealand. So now that I gave you a little bit of background about Carl and his 20 years of seafaring history, this starts to make a little bit more sense. So their designer came up with this, and then the designer's partner actually did the mold that they used for the chocolate. So this kind of represents Carl's seafaring life and also the journey that cacao takes to get to them. So the Porcelana Bar, Porcelana, if you don't know, is a highly sought after bean, cacao bean. It was named Porcelana after the Spanish because instead of being like purpley color when you cut open the raw bean, it's white inside. And it has a very mild, very desirable flavor. So the journey that these beans took was from Venezuela, which is the only place you can find the Porcelana bean, from Venezuela to Miami to New Zealand. So lots of sea crossings going on there. So the beans really went on a journey. The beans are criollos, so they are rare. The farm that they got them from, so this is also this Porcelana Sorotaima. I don't know if that's proper pronunciation, but those are caves in the area where these beans are grown. So let's just look at the front for a minute. So limited edition, they only made 1,200 bars of this. They only got like 2 sacks of beans. So it's a very limited edition. It's an award winner from the International Chocolate Awards. Nothing else on the front. Let's take a look at the back. So it's a 68% cacao. Let's see, beans are from Venezuela. Okay, so like most people who work with Porcelana, they had to wait a little bit to get the beans. They're in very high demand. So this farm only harvests about 400 kilograms per year. So that's a very small harvest, and they got the shipment of their 2 sacks, and they actually let the chocolate age for a year. And when you let the chocolate age for a year, that means that all the bitterness and acidity just goes out of the bar, and you're left with a really, really nice bar. Let's look at their ingredients. So we have cocoa solids, 68%, so that's a combination of the cocoa beans and cocoa butter. Then we have sugar, and that's it. So both the sugar is organic and fair trade, and the cocoa butter is organic and fair trade. The bar is also vegan. Let's see what else is on here. Out of Nelson, New Zealand, and our best before date. All right, let's open it up, see what's inside. This just says a little bit about their process. So it's a funny thing that sometimes we eat things and we have no idea where they come from, and when you figure that out, it becomes a revelation to some people. This is kind of the same kind of story behind Amano, when they're like, where did chocolate come from? So let's open this up. Oh, we talked about that. So the Porcelana bean was white on the inside, like porcelain. Okay, got their cacao pod. Ooh, very shiny. You can see the reflection. All right, let's open it up. They have a really cool mold that carries on the motif of the waves. I can't tell. I think this way is the right side up. All right. So you can see that it's got texture to it. Not only are the waves there, but they're at different heights. That means the bar is going to be different thickness in different places, which will be interesting for the tasting experience. So this is a 68% bar. It does have added cocoa butter. Let's listen to the snap. Ooh, that's a pretty good snap for a 68. That took some effort. Okay, so it's kind of a thick bar. That's all right. Let's warm it up a little bit and see how it tastes. All right, so when I warm the cocoa butter up a little with my finger, because cocoa butter has a melting point that's close to body temperature, I get a little bit of herbal, floral notes and some acid, kind of fruity notes. Porcelana is often considered very mild. It's kind of the original ideal what, quote, chocolate is, and everybody was trying to get to by adding sugar and vanilla and all the other flavorings. So Porcelana bars are considered the king of the cacao beans, and I have high expectations whenever I have a Porcelana bar. So this one is generally mild flavors. When I taste it, I get a little bit a mild raspberry acid taste, mild cacao throughout, and a little bit of a spicy finish at the end. I was expecting a little bit different mouthfeel because of the added cocoa butter. It's a little bit powdery to me. So I was expecting a little bit of different mouthfeel just based on the fact that they're Porcelana beans and there's added cocoa butters. But otherwise, it's a good bar. Not like I said, I have when you slap Porcelana on the outside of your package, I have really high expectations what's going to come out of that. So not a bad bar, but didn't quite meet my expectations for a Porcelana bar. I'd like to try more from them though. For being such a new maker, I'd like to experiment with some of their interesting flavors and see how that's going. So it'll be interesting to see how they come along in the next few years. Okay, so that is Hogarth Chocolate out of New Zealand. There's not a lot of bean to bar makers in New Zealand. There's a few. Foundry comes to mind. I can't think of any others right now. But there are a growing group in New Zealand, and it'll be interesting to see what happens there. They also make I've heard of a Gianduja bar that they make that is very, very soft, that they make with local hazelnuts, I believe. So I'm excited to see what comes from this relatively new maker in the future. So that is this week's bar. Next week we'll meet another maker. We'll find out who it is then. As we travel around the world tasting chocolate. I hope you'll join me by liking and subscribing to this channel. Thanks. See you then.